Roman siege warfare. So deadly, you won't believe the machines they built. Imagine standing on city walls, watching the horizon turn dark with the approach of a Roman legion. Within days, massive wooden towers taller than your walls rise from the ground. Giant crossbows hurl iron bolts that punch through 3 men at once. Battering rams the size of trees pound your gates day and night. And then you see it. The Romans are building a mountain, an actual mountain of earth and stone, rising higher each day, bringing thousands of soldiers to your supposedly impregnable walls. Welcome to Chapters in History. Today, we're diving into the terrifying world of Roman siege warfare and the death machines that made surrender seem like the only rational choice. Hit subscribe because you won't believe what engineering and ruthlessness can accomplish. Let's unleash the engines of war. The Romans didn't just fight battles, they obliterated any obstacle in their path. When a city refused to surrender, Rome brought an arsenal of siege technology so advanced and so brutal that it wouldn't be matched until the invention of gunpowder artillery over 1,000 years later. Roman siege warfare combined cutting-edge engineering with psychological terror. Their machines could throw boulders weighing 60 pounds over 500 yards, fire giant arrows with enough force to skewer multiple soldiers, and topple walls that had protected cities for generations. But the machines were only part of the equation. The Romans approached sieges with methodical precision. They would surround a city, cut off supplies, build fortifications, and then systematically destroy its defenses, using a combination of artillery, siege towers, battering rams, and mining operations. They could maintain a siege for months or even years, and they almost never failed. Today, we're exploring the specific machines and tactics that made Roman siege warfare legendary, from the physics-defying ballista to the infamous siege towers, and the engineering projects that still seem impossible today. Chapter 1. The Ballista. Let's start with Rome's most devastating artillery weapon, the ballista. Picture a crossbow the size of a small car, capable of launching projectiles with the force of a modern rifle. That's the ballista, and it represented some of the most advanced physics and engineering in the ancient world. The ballista worked on torsion power, tightly wound bundles of sinew, horsehair or rope that stored enormous amounts of energy when twisted. 2 vertical arms were inserted into these springs, and pulling them back created tremendous tension. When released, the arms would snap forward, propelling the projectile with devastating force. Roman engineers had perfected the mathematics of ballista construction. They developed formulas based on the weight of the projectile to determine the exact size of the springs, the dimensions of the frame, and the optimal tension. This wasn't trial and error. It was engineering precision that created reliable, standardized weapons across the empire. The largest ballistae could throw stone projectiles weighing up to 60 pounds, over distances exceeding 500 yards. But the real terror was the bolt-firing versions. Ancient historians recorded these bolts punching through shields, through the men holding them, and into the soldiers standing behind. The psychological impact was immense. Defenders on city walls knew that at any moment, an invisible bolt could streak through the air and kill them instantly. The ballista bolts made a distinctive whistling sound in flight, and that sound became associated with sudden death. Romans didn't just use ballistae for direct fire. They could adjust the trajectory to launch projectiles in high arcs over walls, turning them into ancient artillery that could strike anywhere in a city. They would sometimes attach flaming materials to create incendiary weapons. The Romans were so confident in their ballista technology that they mounted smaller versions called scorpios on their fortification walls and even in the field. A legion typically traveled with dozens of these weapons, and crews were trained to operate them with devastating accuracy. Chapter 2. The onager. If the ballista was precise, the onager was pure destructive power. The name means wild donkey in Latin, named for its violent kick when firing. This was Rome's heavy artillery, designed to smash fortifications and terrorize defenders with massive stone projectiles. The onager operated on a different principle than the ballista. It used a single vertical arm inserted into a massive torsion spring. The arm would be pulled down against the spring tension, loading a stone into a sling at the arm's end. When released, the arm would whip upward violently, stopped by a padded crossbeam, and the sling would release the stone in a high arc. The power was extraordinary. A standard onager could throw stones weighing 50 to 90 pounds, over 400 yards. The largest versions could launch projectiles exceeding 150 pounds. When these stones hit walls, they created massive impact forces that could shatter masonry, collapse battlements, and demoralize defenders. The sound alone was terrifying. The release mechanism made a sharp crack. The arm hitting the crossbeam created a thunderous boom, and then came the whistling of the stone arcing through the air, followed end of chapter 5, inflicting chetter. Roman commanders would sometimes fire onagers throughout the night, preventing sleep and breaking the will of defenders, even when causing minimal structural damage. Roman engineers could adjust the trajectory by changing the position of the sling attachment and the tension of the springs, allowing them to hit specific targets. They could pound the same section of wall repeatedly, creating stress fractures that would eventually lead to collapse. But Romans didn't limit themselves to stone ammunition. The onager was as much a terror weapon as a siege engine. Chapter 3. Siege Towers. Nothing symbolized Roman siege warfare more than the massive siege towers called turres. These were mobile fortresses on wheels, sometimes reaching heights of over 100 feet, essentially allowing Romans to build structures taller than the walls they were attacking. The construction was a masterpiece of military engineering. The frame was built from massive timbers, creating a structure several stories tall. The exterior was covered with fresh animal hides soaked in water or vinegar to resist fire errors. Inside, ramps or ladders connected multiple levels, and the whole structure could be wheeled forward on massive logs serving as rollers. The largest siege towers were absolutely enormous. During the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the historian Josephus described towers so tall they overtopped the city walls by a significant margin, with Romans raining down arrows and javelins from above while protected by the tower's structure. The ground floor typically housed a battering ram, a massive tree trunk capped with an iron ram's head, suspended by chains so it could swing back and forth. Teams of soldiers would work the ram while protected by the tower's walls, systematically pounding gates or wall sections. The middle floors were platforms for archers, slingers, and artillery operators. The top floor often featured a drawbridge that could drop onto the enemy walls, allowing Roman soldiers to charge directly onto the battlements. Moving these towers was an engineering challenge. Romans would fill in defensive ditches, level the ground, and construct wooden roads to create a path for the tower. Teams of oxen, or hundreds of soldiers, would push and pull the tower toward the walls, protected by other soldiers holding shields overhead in the testudo formation. The psychological impact of watching these massive structures slowly approaching was devastating. Defenders knew that once the tower reached their walls, Roman soldiers would pour onto the battlements, and the city's fall would be inevitable. Archaeological evidence shows Romans could construct these towers in just days or weeks, using prefabricated components and standardized designs. They would harvest local timber, and specialized engineering units would oversee construction with military precision. Chapter 4. Battering Rams and the Testudo. The battering ram, or Ares, was one of humanity's oldest siege weapons, but Romans perfected it into a devastating tool. A typical Roman battering ram consisted of a tree trunk, sometimes over 100 feet long, capped with a heavy bronze or iron head shaped like a ram's head, a symbol of unstoppable force. The ram was suspended from a frame by chains or ropes, allowing it to swing with tremendous momentum. The physics were simple but effective. Concentrate massive force on a small point repeatedly, and even the strongest gates or walls would eventually fail. Romans built protective shelters over their battering rams called musculi, small testudos, or tortoises. These mobile sheds had sloped roofs covered with wet hides to deflect arrows and resist fire. Soldiers could work the ram in relative safety, protected from defenders above. The testudo, or tortoise formation, deserves special mention as both a tactical formation and a siege technique. Soldiers would lock their shields together, those in the front and sides holding shields outward, those in the center holding shields overhead, creating a protective shell that was nearly impervious to arrows and light projectiles. In this formation, Roman soldiers could advance right up to city walls under a constant hail of arrows and rocks. Engineers could work on gates, and troops could position siege equipment while protected by this mobile shield wall. Ancient writers described defenders dropping massive stones, pouring boiling oil, and even throwing beehives onto testudo formations, yet the Romans would maintain formation discipline and continue their advance. This level of training and coordination turned individual soldiers into a living siege machine. Chapter 5. Siege ramps and earthworks. Perhaps the most audacious Roman siege tactic was building massive earthen ramps directly up to city walls. This wasn't just moving dirt, it was creating artificial mountains through sheer determination and engineering skill. The Siege of Masada in 73 to 74 AD provides the most spectacular example. The Jewish fortress sat atop a plateau rising 1,300 feet above the desert floor, with sheer cliffs on all sides making it seemingly impregnable. The Roman commander Flavius Silva looked at this natural fortress and decided to build a ramp. Roman legionaries, along with thousands of enslaved laborers, constructed a siege ramp 375 feet tall, using earth and stones, reinforced with a framework of timber. This wasn't a crude pile of dirt, it was an engineered structure with proper grading and reinforcement. The ramp still exists today, nearly 2,000 years later, as a testament to Roman engineering ambition. The construction took months and required moving hundreds of thousands of tons of material. Soldiers would fill baskets with earth and stones, carry them up the growing ramp, and dump them while under periodic attack from above. The ramp gradually rose higher until it reached the fortress walls, allowing Romans to wheel a siege tower up and assault the fortifications directly. The psychological warfare was as important as the physical construction. Defenders watched this artificial mountain growing day by day, knowing that nothing they did could stop it. The Romans were literally reshaping the landscape to erase any defensive advantage. At the Siege of Alesia in 52 BC, Julius Caesar ordered construction of 2 complete rings of fortification, totaling 24 miles in circumference. The inner ring surrounded the Gallic fortress, preventing escape. The outer ring protected Romans from the massive relief army approaching to rescue the besieged Gauls. These fortifications weren't simple walls. They included multiple ditches, wooden palisades, watchtowers every 80 feet, sharpened stakes hidden in pits, and even iron caltrops scattered in killing zones. The Romans built this double fortress in less than a month, while simultaneously keeping over 100,000 enemy combatants contained and fighting off attacks. This siege demonstrates the Roman approach to warfare. When faced with a tactical challenge, they would engineer a solution on such a massive scale that success became inevitable. Chapter 6. Mining and countermining. One of the most terrifying aspects of Roman siege warfare happened underground. Roman engineers would dig tunnels toward enemy fortifications, excavating beneath walls to create collapse points. This technique, called mining or sapping, turned siege warfare into a hidden battle beneath the earth. The process was methodical. Engineers would select a section of wall, dig a tunnel toward its foundation, and shore up the tunnel with wooden supports as they progressed. Once under the wall, they would excavate a large chamber, packing it with combustible materials. When ready, they would set fire to the wooden supports and retreat. As the supports burned away, the tunnel would collapse, taking the wall above down with it. Defenders weren't passive. They would dig their own tunnels to intercept Roman miners, leading to brutal underground combat in cramped, dark spaces. They would also place bronze shields on the ground inside the city. The shields would vibrate when enemy tunneling was nearby, allowing defenders to locate and counter the mining operation. Romans sometimes used mining to create psychological pressure, even when structural collapse wasn't the goal. The constant fear that the ground beneath could give way at any moment was mentally exhausting for defenders. Final chapter. Roman siege warfare wasn't just about machines. It was about creating an overwhelming sense of inevitability. When Roman legions arrived at your walls, they brought engineering expertise, inexhaustible patience, and an arsenal of weapons that could destroy any defense given enough time. The BALLISTA and ONAGERs provided devastating firepower that outranged any weapon defenders possessed. The siege towers brought Roman soldiers directly onto walls. Battering rams and testudo formations allowed methodical destruction of gates. The earthworks and ramps literally reshaped terrain to eliminate defensive advantages. and the mining operations meant even the ground beneath wasn't safe. But perhaps the most advanced technology was Roman organizational skill, the ability to coordinate thousands of soldiers and laborers, manage complex construction projects, maintain supply lines, and sustain operations for months or years if necessary. Most cities surrendered before experiencing the full force of Roman siege warfare. Those that resisted learned a harsh lesson. Roman military engineering was so advanced, so relentless, and so devastating that resistance only delayed the inevitable, while ensuring a harsher fate when the walls finally fell. What Roman siege machine would you least want to face? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Chapters in History for more military technology that changed the world. Next time, we're exploring the siege of Constantinople and the massive chains that protected the city for 800 years. Until then, remember, some wars aren't won with courage, they're won with better engineering.